Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Is It Fascist? Today, we're going to be taking a look at a movement that most people would probably consider fascist within a show that a lot of people refer to as promoting fascism. I'm talking, of course, about the Yeagerists from Attack on Titan. A little bit of background: the Yeagerists were, I believe, founded by Flock. I know that Aaron is technically the leader. They're named after him. He's their kind of ideological and spiritual guide. But it seems like most of the recruitment, the day to day stuff, the military matters are handled directly by Flock. Mostly drawn from the Scout Corps, which tends to have the youngest, most idealistic members of the military, they were founded in regards to a belief that the military junta that had governed the country for the last couple of years was incapable of dealing with the threats facing Eldia. That they were weak, they were obsessed with trying to find compromise and carry out diplomacy where it was impossible, in that the only solution to the Eldian question was to use weapons of mass destruction in the form of the rumbling to annihilate all life outside of parity, ensuring that the Eldian people were finally safe once and for all. So, is this group fascist, though? The problem whenever you're dealing with groups like the Yeagerists is they don't really have a defined political program. You have aspects of it and you have to extrapolate a lot, but we don't really know what it would look like if they seized power. We don't even know if their ultimate goal was to seize power on a permanent basis, or it was just to overthrow the military government, carry out the rumbling, and then step down or remain on as some sort of vanguard party to prevent the subsequent governments from backsliding. So some of these are a little difficult, and I'm wondering if maybe some of these I should be taking out for parties that are not in power. But at the same time, we'll get to that as we go. So the first characteristic on this list: an ideologically syncretic mixture of reactionary, conservative, and revolutionary slash progressive ideas. I would say this 100% applies. Um, there's a scene in one of the final seasons that I think really reminded me of the Cultural Revolution, where Shadis is teaching the various recruits how to fight Titans, and they basically go, "Look, this is pointless. This is like some reactionary thing. We're not fighting Titans anymore. We're fighting humans. We should be learning how to use guns." How to fight at long range rather than close range. And the students wind up beating him up for being kind of out of date. And in general, the criticism of the military government is it's too conservative, it's not radical enough, it doesn't have a solution for any of the problems. And this is combined with we'll get into this later on, but a deeply reactionary desire to restore traditional Eldia. To reclaim the lands that Eldia lost in previous wars, to kind of get rid of the identity that was forged over the previous 100 years that the people of Paradis were the last remnant of humanity, into a more explicitly Eldian one. What would have been interesting is what the Yeagerist position on the monarchy would be. Because Aaron obviously supports Historia remaining, so I would imagine the rest of the Yeagerists support maintaining the monarchy. It would be interesting if part of it was like a Fritz restoration, where they were going to restore some of Historia's powers that the military had taken from her. We have no idea, though, but I do think it's safe to put it in this category. Once again, we don't have a complete political program from the Yeagerists, but as far as we can determine, yes. Identification with the clearly defined in-group and out-group, cultural, religious, ethnic, or racial. This is probably the most clear example of this you can find in fiction. Basically, the in-group is Eldians, the out-group is non-Eldians. Their goal is to exterminate all non-Eldians. While many Eldians, and I guess there's kind of subgroups within that, because they don't really seem to care about killing all the Eldians that are in internment camps or on the continent. Beyond just the Eldian people, it's the Eldians who live on Paradis. And then to a certain extent, there's also a desire to purge all ideological adversaries. So I would say this definitely applies, one of the clearest cases we'll ever see. A revanchist or romantic nationalist desire to restore the nation to its former glory or avenge itself against a historical foe. I mean, that's the entire purpose of the Yeagerists. They call the state they want to establish the Neo-Eldian Empire. If reviving the previous name of your country and sticking the prefix Neo in front of it isn't a form of romantic or revanchist nationalism, then wanting to exterminate all other peoples who ever wronged you definitely is. So the Yeagerists get a full point here. A belief in the supremacy of the party or state. Here's the issue is we don't really know. Once again, I don't know if the Yeagerists had a governmental plan, like if they intended to stay in power for a long time, or if their goal was solely to resolve the Eldian question and then go back to what the status quo was, or restore Historia, or set up some other form of government. So I'm going to have to put a 0 here, but it's really kind of a null because I don't really know how to handle this one. A conception of an idealized new man. Now this one is kind of difficult. Of all the ones that I have listed here within it, this is kind of the most challenging one to come across because it is a critical aspect of most totalitarian ideologies, but it's something that I think often gets overlooked in fiction. And this can kind of blend over into, I think it's the next one. Is the next one a man of action? No. I would actually say I'm going to give them a point for this because one of the core aspects of the Yeagerists is that the existing Eldians aren't able to deal with the challenges facing them. And so they kind of need to undergo a reformation, and they need to be willing to commit genocide to do whatever it takes in pursuit of their own survival. Also, the Yeagerists, I think the whole concept of the Scouts, you could almost argue, is like this, because they profess to kind of almost be separate from the rest of the Eldian people in that they are very ideologically and idealistically committed. You have the whole our hearts for the cause, an absolute belief in the desire to achieve freedom for humanity and the safety of Eldia. And they almost they look at the other military divisions with scorn because they're full of people who are corrupt or just want a paycheck or want an easy life that isn't farming. And I do think when you get into Irwin and Flock and Aaron, you have this desire to build this this new Eldian man who's willing to sacrifice for the greater good, who's willing to lay down his life for the cause. So maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but I'm going to give them a point here. A nationalist foreign policy combined with an amoral, zero-sum, or realist conception of international affairs. This is more or less the entire premise of Attack on Titan. In my opinion, is exploring the problems of the security dilemma, nationalism, and zero-sum gains. Basically, at this point in time, the Yeagerists are left with 3 possibilities. A, they either put up a valiant fight, LDA is. They put up a valiant fight and eventually get destroyed by a coalition of the remaining world's countries. B, they exterminate the rest of the world using the rumbling. Or C, they use Zeke's plan and euthanize the Eldian people by sterilization. And that's really all they have, and none of these is a particularly moral outcome. I'd argue probably the sterilization is the most moral outcome. But regardless, someone has to absolutely win or absolutely lose within this. It's a zero-sum game. There's no real ability to negotiate, and I think the Yeagerists very much accept that. So we're going to give them a point there. And indifference to or marginalization of economics. Once again, we don't know what their governance program is. It does not appear to be part of their governance. I don't recall them talking about social justice or class warfare or redistribution of wealth or protectionism or anything like that. So I'm just going to give them, it's tricky. Because they don't explicitly ignore it, but they don't have it either. So I'm just going to give this a 0 for now. Because I don't think I have enough information. If this is the deciding factor, then I'll come back and take a look at it again. A masculine approach to problem solving focusing on decisive action. Once again, that was the entire purpose of the Yeagerists being formed. that they didn't like the inability and moribundness of the conservative military regime to deal with any of the existential threats facing Eldia. And once again, it grew out of the Scouts, and the Scouts are very much all about action, viewing the rest of humanity as being kind of lazy and moribund, where they're this active, dynamic group trying to save humanity, trying to expand the reach of humanity, trying to actively fight the Titans. Encouragement of mass political action, often in the form of a political party or other organization. This one is difficult because, once again, we don't see how that they would govern. If memory serves, there is a definite populist element to them. And they did try to appeal to the rest of the military. And I think they did rally support of the general public. Because if I recall, there's like something on the wiki that says the Yeagerists control everything within the walls, and they eventually become the new army of Eldia after the series. But we don't really know, so I'm just going to give them half a point here because it's not very clear in the story. Vanguardism, or the belief in an elite inner group to safeguard the new order/revolution. Once again, we don't know what their long-term governance plan is, but I think we can probably safely say this, as the Yeagerists are a subset of the military who believe it's their duty to overthrow the existing military government and maintain control of the Eldian state, at least until the time that they can carry out the rumbling and destroy the rest of the world. I think it's quite likely that they would have formed some sort of Praetorian Guard. I think it's once again said on the wiki that they replaced the army with just their people. It's kind of a stretch, but I would say in this case they're more Vanguardist than not Vanguardist, if that makes sense. An often charismatic leader who wields absolute or near absolute power over the state or movement. Pick one. You have Aaron, who's kind of the spiritual leader, who's the ideological leader, and then you have Flock, who's the practical leader. Their followers are fanatical and willing to die for their leader's dream. So I don't even think I really need to go into more detail on that one. Sublimation of the individual and individual rights into the interests of the group, state, or party. 100%. The fact that they were willing to exterminate all of their life on Earth, wipe out the current regime, and basically do whatever it took to gain power and to carry out their goals, I think really typifies that. Also, once again, they grew out of the Scouts, and the entire philosophy of the Scouts is that the individual doesn't matter. What matters is service to collective humanity. Once again, our hearts for the cause. So, I don't think, once again, I need to go into too much detail. And this brings us to our total, which is ironically enough 9.5. So it is right on the borderline of being fascist or para-fascist. And this is kind of what I feared from the beginning, because like I said, a couple of these we really are probably the case. Like I would imagine a Yeagerist government wouldn't really care about the economy that much. And like some of these other things we just don't really know. I think I said midway through that if this was the deciding factor, I was just going to round it up. So I'm going to give them a 0.5 for that. And the Yeagerists are going to come out with 10. So they're going to be within the fascist category. And that was more or less where I thought that they were going to be. I think they're pretty obviously meant to kind of typify that sort of thing. The military, you could say that the military government is kind of like a conservative authoritarian regime, whereas the Yeagerists are a lot more radical. The military is a lot more pragmatic, a lot more cautious, less ideologically driven, more willing to see compromises, whereas the Yeagerists are just full balls to the wall. We have to just wipe out all threats to Eldia, 100% offensive all of the time. So you can take this as either it's the borderline between para-fascist and fascist, or we can just round it up and put it into fascist. So that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Even if most people called the Yeagerists like a fascist movement just kind of on reflex, I hope with these I at least kind of give some justification for it and kind of break it down and look at it in kind of neutral terms. I didn't really, I, don't- I have my own ideas, obviously, when I go into these about where I think they're going to wind up, but it's not as if I really rig the voting one way or another. I'm legitimately like with when I did the MAGA one, I wasn't sure if it was going to be higher or not than what it wound up getting. So I hope you enjoy the video. God bless. Post below on what other things you'd like me to do, and we'll talk again real soon.